Hi, I'm Nojave. In this video I'm going to be going deep into the 3 DLCs for Dragon Age Inquisition, Jaws of Hakkon, The Descent, and Trespasser. It's going to be huge spoiler territory. There are other reviews that are just reviews. This is sort of going deep into the plot points and seeing what they might mean for Dragon Age 4 more than anything else. Heavy spoilers. But if you want to get deep into what's going on with the DLC, then that's what this video is for. Let's get to it.
A lot of people, myself included, weren't really too impressed with the way Inquisition ended. It felt like a halfway effort. It posed more questions than it answered, and Corypheus seemed like an unusually two-dimensional, low-effort villain for BioWare. Couple this with the MMO-influenced quest design, and we got a real problem with resolving plot threads in a way that feels as final and meaningful as in previous games. In the years since Inquisition came out, there's been 3 major $15-a-pop DLC expansions. Jaws of Hakkon, the first, represents a straightforward continuation of Inquisition's level design priorities, a big outdoor area with many side quests and collectibles. The second, The Descent, is a Deep Roads dungeon crawl like the series hasn't actually seen since Origins and the Awakening expansion. The third and most impressive of the DLCs is Trespasser, the game's missing final act that not only brings Inquisition to the conclusion it was setting up from the get-go, but explains long-running mysteries about the setting's deep history and supernatural cosmology. Together, they add 25 hours to the game. But coming back to Inquisition post-climax is a little weird. All the conversations are tapped out and half-remembered. So, I began at the beginning and put in a second 80-hour playthrough to the game. It was worth it. The new content for Inquisition reshapes Inquisition's presentation as dramatically as DLC changed Mass Effect 3's total experience, with equally positive outcomes. I enjoyed my second playthrough with Inquisition much more than my first. I learned more, I had more fun, and, critically, I knew what to ignore. Jaws of Hakkon is a great place to start in talking about the DLC because it doesn't do anything differently from the formula of the main campaign's quest regions, but it does those things more sharply and cleanly than any previous region. It's a genuine side story, unmoored from the concerns of defeating Corypheus, but one that gives depth to your Inquisitor's overall journey. You must follow in the footsteps of Ameridan, the first Inquisitor, who disappeared in the verdant Frostback Basin region some 800 years previous. History has forgotten Ameridan as a person. He's only really known for his significance in starting the Inquisition. As you progress through the DLC's main quest, you see that his journey parallels your own to some extent. He traveled with a diverse party of likable irregulars like you do. According to popular history, Ameridan disappeared hunting dragons for sport, selfishly abandoning his duty for vain glory. The truth, of course, is more complicated. But ultimately, the idea behind Jaws of Hakkon is to reflect on how your Inquisitor is likely to be remembered in the far future. Will the truth of how you arrived at your decisions, the depth of your friendships and rivalries, survive the passage of time? It's a question that's equally applicable to Inquisition as a piece of software, unfortunately. I didn't expect to enjoy a second playthrough of Inquisition because Inquisition has so much content that is frivolous and time-consuming. When I went through the game the first time, it took me 100 hours to finish most of the things in most of the regions. Shard collections, landmark collections, the works. It felt like a colossal waste of time, and I had no desire to do it again. This time, I only did quests, stories, and collectibles that interested me, and I cut the time almost in half. The main campaign took me only 55 hours this time, the new content about 25. I did not miss anything significant, and I mean that sincerely. Every plot element I wanted to pursue, I pursued. I skipped the equivalent of nearly 2 seasons of a television show worth of content that has no meaningful connection to the plot, and no reward besides tiny stat boosts and experience points. In Origins, most of the side quests were thematically tied to either the plot or the setting, and the game stuck with you more as a result. Inquisition, in the main campaign, didn't have the same impact. The inconveniences of the game's world are equally as memorable as the plot, and compete with each other to define the game experience as a whole. It really didn't have to be that way. Jaws of Hakkon has the same large wilderness areas punctuated by small quest hubs that characterize Inquisition's maps in the main campaign, but its main quest ties into the themes of the plot in a way that's much more meaningful than anything you'll find in the Exalted Plains or the Hissing Wastes. And the side quests help illuminate the mysterious folkways of the Avar barbarians who you get to deal with up close with for the first time. There's Shard Collection and Landmark Collection too, of course, but everything else actually has meaning, either directly reflecting on your Inquisitor's journey or expanding the player's cultural familiarity with the setting. In the main campaign, some regions had main quest lines that ended with little more than a fight and an item. They were supremely forgettable, and stood at odds with the charisma of the companion characters and the lavish presentation of the primary plot quests. Frostback Basin is what Inquisition could have been had it been edited tighter, with more focus on what makes sense and less focus on what bulks up a marketer's definition of content. And it's great. It's really, truly great. Jaws of Hakkon is scenic, well divided into distinct areas like jungle, swamp, and an ocean bluff, with a quest hub full of compelling, if quickly drawn characters. The only character who gets the close-up treatment is Ameridan himself. Ameridan hadn't actually been hunting dragons for sport, he was hunting them on behalf of Orlais, and this particular dragon has the soul of an Avar god of destruction inside of it. The Avar themselves want the soul to be released, so they're happy that you're off to kill the dragon. But the old soul made it a stronger opponent than Ameridan had initially counted on. The best he could do was stop time. Pretty good trick altogether. Ameridan was a powerful elven mage. So was my Inquisitor this time around, and that is an unexpectedly good choice. Inquisition, with all the DLC included, is more about the elves than the main campaign really led on, with its lack of alienages and only cursory involvement with the Dalish clans. Your conversation with Ameridan is brief but illuminating. Mages were once much more welcome within the Chantry, even within the Seekers. His main curiosity is the fate of one of his companions, but his commitment ultimately was to his duty, holding back the dragon god until time itself runs out. For Ameridan, being the Inquisitor was a duty that consumed and defined him, like being a Grey Warden in Origins, like being the champion of Kirkwall in Dragon Age 2, and, as you'll learn later in Trespasser, like being Fen'Harel to Solas. Inquisition's strongest running theme is how the organization and the legend both elevate and conceal the individual. Jaws of Hakkon is all about expanding that dynamic, adding historical depth and resonance. It's also about collecting shards, leveling up, and killing dragons, and it's a success at both. If anything, it reflects poorly on the initial release. It wouldn't have taken much more to make the majority of areas in Inquisition as compelling and worthwhile as the Frostback Basin. If the entire game had been edited this well, it would have been as memorable as Origins. As it is, Inquisition's main campaign is a frustrating compromise between traditional tabletop-influenced fantasy storytelling and contemporary collectible crazy design fads. The next piece of DLC, though, does two unexpected things to Inquisition. It reintroduces a vision of the Deep Roads faithful to Origins, and forever alters the setting's deep mythology. Players are a bit divided on the Deep Roads. They're the most traditional dungeon crawls in the franchise, and the sprawling areas of the Descent are functionally indistinguishable from those in Origins and the Kal Herol tag from Awakening. Some people don't like the winding, gloomy labyrinths of caves and ruins that comprise the Deep Roads, and if you didn't like it in Origins, chances are you won't like it here either. It's very faithful to the original aesthetic. In scope, however, the Descent is much more ambitious. You go deeper than the roads themselves, and while the DLC isn't explicit in how it provides its answers, it does go into one of the franchise's oldest mysteries. What's the special connection between the dwarves and Lyrium? Why can't dwarves use magic, while they can handle the otherwise volatile and transformative magical catalyst? One thing I found incredibly impressive about Origins was how thoroughly and successfully it established the laws and lore of the setting, and how subsequent games built mystery by expanding on and subverting the answers given to questions posed right back at the very beginning of the whole franchise. In many ways, The Descent is the most traditional RPG adventure that BioWare has put out in a long while. While it doesn't have the dungeon complexity of Golems of Amgarak, which was designed for folks who wanted a Baldur's Gate-era dungeon crawl, it is much more complex and winding than the Taiga and Awakening. It's a legitimately comfortable compromise between old-school RPG level design and new-school RPG presentation. While straightforward in terms of goals, go deeper and deeper until you find the source of mysterious world-rending earthquakes, you experience the Deep Roads in a variety of ways. In Origins, you are just an adventuring party. In Inquisition, you're an organization on top of it, and there's a special operations table just for unlocking hidden areas of the Taig and beyond. You don't just carve a path of destruction through the Darkspawn, the mysterious Shah Bertal. You repair, replace, and excavate entire sections of the lost underground world. The empty, broken spaces fill up with purposeful scaffolding of the Inquisition's making. It's a genuinely novel element in fantasy RPG gaming. Not only getting to explore and loot, but reshape and leave your own mark on the environment. Not to mention the thrilling hook of beating a difficult path to rooms not set foot in for millennia. It's worth noting that while Jaws of Hakkon and the Descent are intended for higher-level characters, you can begin them any time after reaching Skyhold. It's especially useful for the inclusion of a crafting material merchant in the main Legion of the Dead camp. Elfroot by the bushel, letting you upgrade potions without grinding out nonsense collectibles. You'll need the extra nudge. I didn't feel like the main campaigns of either Inquisition or Dragon Age 2 adequately portrayed the Darkspawn as the inexhaustible evil that Origins did. The Descent changes that. It has some of the most intense, sustained combat encounters in the totality of Inquisition. The Darkspawn feel like they've been making themselves at home for a long, long time. And as much pleasure as there is in fighting them, there's more pleasure in learning where they might ultimately be coming from. The Descent isn't explicitly about the source of the Darkspawn. It's about a Titan. The Titans are something new in the Dragon Age mythology, framed as being an ancient dwarven legend that may have been erased somehow from the memories. The first half of the Descent is all about the Deep Road's adventure. Loot, explore, fight, go deeper. Then, after an amazing and sprawling wave-based Darkspawn battle, you reach the entrance to an ancient lyrium mine, sealed off long ago. It was suspected that a Titan might be involved then, too. Going deeper, you're ambushed by the Shoppertall, lyrium-infused creatures who were once dwarves, fused into their armor, with bolt weapons remarkably similar to those that the Darkspawn use. They protect the Bastion of the Pure, a massive, sprawling lyrium cavern. It's one of the most strange and mystical locations yet visited in Dragon Age, and the operations you unlock to access the most remote portions of the cavern, like a spire surrounded by a raging subterranean sea, have a draw all their own. Exploration has never been more fun in Inquisition than here in the Descent. On all sides, you're surrounded by the best loot, the best dungeon design, and the most far-ranging mysteries in the entire game. Once you've reached the deepest parts of the Bastion, the game prepares you for a big reveal. Titans, you've learned by this point, are somehow related to dwarves. They reshape the world of stone with their song. Their song is like that of the lyrium, but more focused, with purpose. This next area, the Wellspring, is another miles-long underground vault with a Shoppertall tide clinging to massive stalactites, along with a riot of plant life and a pure bright light. Lyrium veins converge on a great blue crystalline heart, the heart of a Titan. You're inside the Titan. You have been ever since entering the Bastion of the Pure. These are beings that are the size of mountains, with blood of pure magic. This is the end of the answers that the DLC alone is willing to give. Once you defeat the DLC's boss, a lyrium guardian creature, your new companion for the Shaperate is hit with a blast of magic and is able to cast a spell of sorts on accident. A dwarf doing magic is a big deal, supposedly impossible. But there's a small weird precedent in the main campaign. If Dagna is at Skyhold, and you let her research your mark, Dagna too has one brief moment of connection with the Fade, the realm of dreams and magic. Dagna dreams of being a Titan. With no other information, it was cryptic conversation in the main game, but with the Descent, it's clear that Dagna is explicitly experiencing a vision of herself as a Titan. Solus once described the dwarves as the severed arm of a great warrior lying in a pool of blood. Initially, this seemed to refer to the fall of the Tigers. Many in the Dragon Age fan community now feel that it refers to the Titans. Dwarves seem to be some kind of pale shadow of the Titans, a part shaved off from a godlike whole. Solus knows about the Titans, although he won't reveal anything personally. Trespasser, the next DLC, has more to tell of them, including a secret room with a fresco depicting their destruction at the hands of the Elves. The Elves, at the height of their empire, killed almost all the Titans to mine them for their lyrium. This is part of why Solus, as Fen'Harel, banished the old gods in the Elven pantheon. The empire was unstable, hungry for more lyrium, more magic, with no concept of restraint, decadent and supreme. But how do the Darkspawn play into it? Another slightly obscure conversation from the main campaign shows us the answer, and interestingly makes the events of Dragon Age 2 much more important than just Templars and mages. In the main game, Varric's subplots are all about red lyrium. Eventually, you can help Varric and Bianca, the real Bianca who designed the crossbow, with cutting off Corypheus' access to the source of the substance. Back in Dragon Age 2, Varric and the Champion of Kirkwall discover red lyrium hidden in a primeval taig, sealed away from the other dwarves for thousands and thousands of years. Its location was supposed to be a secret. Bianca gave that location away to Corypheus, who had taken the body of the Grey Warden you helped in the Legacy DLC for Dragon Age 2. Corypheus didn't start out with a big random stockpile of red lyrium. It came from one source, deep under the earth. Bianca also reveals something unbelievably important for the entire franchise. Red lyrium is lyrium that has the blight. Lyrium is alive, and not just a mineral. The Descent shows us that it isn't just alive, it's the blood of dwarven gods, or maybe gods who are dwarves. That part of the mythology isn't yet clear. Which means that somewhere, deep under the earth, is a Titan with the blight. The Shoppertall have many physical and technological parallels with the Darkspawn, and they live within the Titan as its children and protectors. Why else would the Darkspawn spring from underground, their assaults on the Deep Roads unending for age after age? Archdemons don't make the Darkspawn, after all. It's only when the old god dragons are found and made Darkspawn themselves that a blight occurs. Furthermore, within the Bastion of the Pure, you find pieces of a journal that seems to detail the first dwarven encounter with the Darkspawn ever, long before the Tigers fell, before the dwarves even recognized the enemy they were dealing with in the Darkspawn. Why include this story in a DLC about the Titans unless it's relevant? Your Inquisitor says at the end of the Descent that they're leaving with more questions than answers, but if you look at all the foreshadowing that's being done, both in the main campaign and here in the DLC, the questions guide the player right along to a meaningful conclusion. The next DLC, Trespasser, is all about the ancient elves and their powers. It takes special care to spell out how the elves are the only ones who knew how to kill a Titan, which means that the weapons they used to kill the Shapers of Stone might be the only way to stop the Darkspawn for good. After the Inquisitor leaves the Wellspring, the rock seals up into an impenetrable barrier, the secrets of the Titans staying, for the most part, secret. That's alright. What players really wanted to know at the end of Inquisition is what the fuck was going on with Solus. Trespasser didn't feel like the climax to just my Inquisitor's journey. In many ways, it felt like a continuation and climax for plot threads left dangling since the very opening moments of Dragon Age Origins. In Origins, if you play a Dalish elf, you begin by finding an elven ruin with a powerful artifact at the center, an alluvion. Behind it are dark whispers and smoke. It takes your lifelong friend, who you see later as a Darkspawn, and leaves you tainted. The alluvion is why you have to join the Grey Wardens in the first place. Witch Hunt, the last DLC for Origins, is similar in many ways to Trespasser, and also ends with an alluvion. It is the very last thing in that game, and when Morrigan steps through the alluvion, she disappears into mysteries that weren't expanded on until the main campaign of Inquisition. In Dragon Age 2, Meryl spends all the game trying to restore an alluvion at the cost of her own people. Her success is limited, she fixes the mirror, but can't reach out through the greater network. The alluvions have been one of the most consistently present artifacts in the entire franchise, and now, in Trespasser, they're all coming back on. Someone is reactivating the alluvion network, and it couldn't come at a worse time for your Inquisitor. Another thing that the main campaign spent a great deal of time with, especially in the latter third of companion conversations, is how the Inquisition will face a serious crisis of purpose should Corypheus ever be actually defeated. One of the things that was so interesting about Witch Hunt for Origins was how, a year after the end of the Fifth Blight, the hero of Ferelden is at incredibly loose ends. He's the greatest hero in the kingdom, with nowhere to go. Following Morrigan into the alluvion network is as much an act of personal desperation as it is curiosity. Trespasser takes place 2 years after Corypheus' defeat, opening on the Inquisitor's arrival at the Winter Palace to discuss whether or not the Inquisition will continue to operate under the new Divine as an Orlesian organization, or whether it will be completely disbanded, which Ferelden is demanding. It's a good setup, and a question I've never actually seen an RPG ask. Will you let go of all the power you've accumulated now that its purpose is over, or will you simply change the purpose? The opening hour doesn't really give any indication how unusual Trespasser is as a DLC. It's similar to a couple of Mass Effect 3's DLCs, Leviathan in terms of plot significance, Citadel in terms of character interaction, but to be honest, I haven't seen a BioWare release quite like it since Mask of the Betrayer for Neverwinter Nights 2. It isn't as long or as complex as Mask of the Betrayer, but it's got a similar shift in scope and intention, taking you out of the kingdom and into the spaces beyond the material plane, with a mystical gift that could very well kill you to resolve conflicts millennia in the making. In Mask, you were a spirit eater, and you had a terrible magical hunger that could eventually consume your character. Here, the magic in your mark, in the Inquisitor's hand, has finally become completely unstable. By the end, it's causing explosions that can destroy your entire party, if not drained of the magical energy every minute or so. But that's later on. The first hour seems like a direct retread of Citadel from Mass Effect 3. Catch up with old companions, get extended scenes where you pal around with them as a friend and not the capital letter Inquisitor. They're not as good as the scenes in Citadel, partly because of narrative placement, I think. Citadel's companion conversations were framed against the last desperate hours before a do-or-die battle against the Reapers. Everyone needed these moments of humanity. The end was right around the corner. There was a delicately bittersweet quality in Citadel that Trespasser just doesn't have. Here, you're not on the edge of an abyss, narratively speaking. It's a garden party. Don't get me wrong, the conversations are fun and charismatic, but most of them take place before the plot of Trespasser really gets rolling, before the danger becomes clear. And once the game does lay into the conveyor belt of secrets and revelations that comprise the rest of it, all these casual conversations are completely eclipsed. What's really significant is how all these characters have begun to pivot towards the positions they'll have in the next Dragon Age game. Your choice of Divine will actually be Divine, funny hat and all. Dorian is the official Tevinter ambassador to the south. Varric is now in charge of Kirkwall. Cassandra's has success rebuilding the Seekers like she wanted to. Everyone's reached positions of power and personal fulfillment, and it's a true delight to see the characters that way. The question on everyone's mind is what will happen next. If the Inquisition is disbanded, is that the end, or a new beginning? Soon they have a more straightforward and pressing question. How did this dead Qunari get here? The short version of the answer is something that Inquisition players may have suspected since the main campaign's lackluster climax and infuriatingly vague post-credits scene. Corypheus was never really the main villain in Inquisition. Not once. It was never more than a patsy who was too arrogant to realize it, too powerful to be singularly defined by it. But patsy he was, and patsy was your Inquisitor as well. Solus was the one responsible for almost all the problems you face in Inquisition, and the fall of the elves' magical empire so long ago. There's actually a lot that gets revealed in Trespasser that you might have picked up on earlier, but unless you had a Dalish Inquisitor, it's easy to miss. Since Solus is, in terms of the franchise's long-term narrative, the most important character in Inquisition, this playthrough I made a character specifically to see Solus's romantic side plot. What might he tell a lover that he wouldn't tell a friend? Quite a bit. The most significant scene in Solus's romance is when he explains the significance of the Valisline, or blood writing, the tattoos that Dalish give themselves to honor the gods. They do honor the gods, that much is true. Elven slave owners branded their slaves with them to honor the patron god. They are marks of servitude. When Solus was Fen-Harel, in the time of the elves, he removed the Valisline from countless slaves and freed them through an underground Eluvian network. When Solus offers to remove the Inquisitor's Valisline, he's not just being caring, he's repeating a ritual he hadn't used in thousands of years. The ritual that earned him the name Fen-Harel. The elves were as power-hungry and corrupt as ancient Tevinter. Maybe more so, Solus says in Trespasser. Theirs was a society of true riches and wonders, for the Evanuris and their chosen alone. This is what prompted his great betrayal. It's long been part of the lore, from way back to Origins, that Fen-Harel was able to walk between the old gods, who may have been the same old gods as the Tevinter worshipped, and the Evanuris, or the Elven pantheon. Both counted him as friend, and he betrayed them all somehow. Trespasser is about that somehow. In those days, he says, there was a mortal world and the Fade, and they were linked together. All of the elven technology depended on passing through and utilizing the Fade. Powerful elves traveled freely between the two. Fen-Harel convinced both sets of gods to retreat from the mortal world into the Fade. Fen-Harel then summoned the most powerful magics the world of Dragon Age had ever seen and created the Veil. No more would mortals and spirits mix freely. The age of magic and wonders was over. The age of men and darkspawn had begun. Without access to the Fade, elven civilization was immediately destroyed. While in a shattered elven library, on the edge of the Fade, the Inquisitor hears the last words and thoughts of the elves trapped within the Fade when the Veil dropped. Their deaths were confusing and horrific. Fen-Harel committed a magical genocide and changed the mortal world forever. In retrospect, it's not very surprising that he was reluctant to discuss this in the main campaign. So that's Fen-Harel in ancient times. What was he doing in Inquisition? Following the creation of the Veil, Solus fell into a deep magical coma, the same one as the Guardians of Mythal's temple went into while waiting for Trespassers and Supplicants in the main campaign. That's why Solus is so much more invested in the Fade than in the mortal world. He's been drifting there since before the Dwarven Tigers were destroyed. Those spirits, that world, is more real to him than this one. He woke up a year before the events of Inquisition and saw the result of the creation of the Veil. Disaster in his eye. The elves have forgotten themselves, slaves and refugees and alieners, and the so-called free Dalish elves, who still mark themselves with the brands of their long-dead masters. Magic has retreated from the world. Solus cares little for the mortal plane as it is. He's made a huge mistake. Trapping the gods didn't free the elves, it killed them, and their culture. Do you remember how easily Solus murdered those who trapped his spirit friend in his loyalty quest in the main campaign? That's Solus unfiltered. He is an elven radical, transcendent in his rage and self-conviction. The orb that shattered at the end of the main campaign, that's Solus's very own artifact. It helped create the Veil in the first place. Solus figured it would kill Corypheus when Corypheus used it, so he let Corypheus have it. What he didn't count on was the fact that Corypheus is like an archdemon. He can't be killed unless his soul is displaced completely. Solus helps the Inquisition because Corypheus was, first and foremost, his mistake. What's really amazing is Trespasser's final revelation. Solus's plan all along was not significantly different than that of Corypheus. Corypheus wanted to tear down the Veil and rule over all creation from the Maker's empty throne in the Black City. Solus didn't want Corypheus to rule. Corypheus is Tevinter. Tearing down the Veil, though, that's Solus's whole deal. He made a mistake. Everything he did so the elves would be reborn, stronger than ever, not reduced to slum dwellers and nomads. If he tears the veil down, elves can reclaim their mastery of the Fade. The material world will be destroyed, of course, flooded with spirits and demons. Most everyone will die. Solas doesn't care. He cares more for the spirit world, more for lost legacy of the elves. Solas wanted to be part of Inquisition, in no small part, simply to get his goddamn orb back, and get his plan back on track. When it shattered, he left. There must be some other way to tear down the veil. If that happens, all the old gods, both good and bad and in between, will return. All of them. This is a hell of a setup for Dragon Age 4. It seems a little contradictory to say that an expansion that spends so much effort on setting up the next game is a satisfactory conclusion to Inquisition. It is, though, because of all the answers provided, because of how all the new DLC tie Inquisition into the deep mythology of the setting in ways it never has before, because it contextualizes the game as part of the larger franchise, because it gets back to what makes Dragon Age unique to fantasy storytelling, the cumulative emotional investment. Each Dragon Age game builds on the last in ways that are much more complicated than the Mass Effect series. Mass Effect is linear, a trilogy of directly connected stories with the same protagonist. In Dragon Age, you aren't attached to the protagonist, you're attached to the world. Characters from previous games grow and change as people. The player's understanding of how Thetis cosmologically functions grows and changes. The scope of the conflict continually expands. Player investment is cumulative. The more you play, the more invested you are, the more dynamic and significant the impact of the game and its plot turns are. If you never played Legacy for Dragon Age 2, Corypheus doesn't make a whole lot of sense in Inquisition. If you never played Awakening, Anders doesn't make a whole lot of sense in Dragon Age 2. If you never played Dragon Age 2, Varric feels like a background character in Inquisition. Which brings me back to Witch Hunt. That DLC did not have half the answers that Trespasser did, but it set up so much stuff that would be used in later games. Again, the plot with Morrigan and the Illuvians was mostly skipped over in Dragon Age 2, not to be explored until Inquisition, not to be concluded until right here in Trespasser. Trespasser sets up much, much more than Witch Hunt ever did. Most significantly, it sets up Solas as the villain. In a way, the entirety of Inquisition is about setting Solas up as the villain. Corypheus was a total red herring. I mean, he was a bad guy, sure, and needed to be stopped, but he was simple, and he was being used by Solas all along. Solas has the potential to be the best villain ever featured in a Dragon Age title, possibly the best BioWare villain since John Irenicus, because of how incredibly well you get to know him in Inquisition, how huge swaths of the game seem to be primarily for foreshadowing purposes. BioWare has been playing it cool on announcing a fourth game, but Trespasser is exclusively for the purpose of setting one up. It retroactively contextualizes Inquisition as the setup for a fourth game, and when it gets here, you've got a conflict that has incredible personal meaning for the player from the get-go, and historical resonance for the setting. After deciding the Inquisition's fate at the end of the DLC, you get another post-credits scene where your advisors meet, either in secret or as a wing of the Chantry, to discuss Solas. You don't know who Solas has gotten to, where his strength lies. So the Inquisition's remnants are going somewhere Fen'Harel has no power. The Tevinter Imperium. A dagger is stabbed into the map, and speculation begins. So next game will be Elves against the Imperium, as it was long ago. Fen'Harel is not a mustache-twirling black hat like Corypheus. You understand where he's coming from, you see how personal it is to him, and you see how badly he needs to be stopped, saved from himself and his regret before the whole world suffers for it. That's a hook. That is square one for the next game. I haven't felt this excited for the franchise since Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age 2 was formatted terribly, and is a chore to play as a game. Dragon Age Inquisition suffered from MMO-influenced design and the lack of meaningful connection to the game world that comes as baggage with all that fetch questing. It suffered from feeling divorced from the epic, long-dangling story threads of the franchise as a whole. I was skeptical that the series would be faithful to what made me love it in the first place. All three of these DLC packs change that for Inquisition. Jaws of Hakkon shows how charismatic Inquisition can be in its systems of exploration and collection. The Descent shows that they haven't forgotten the franchise's tabletop roots. And finally, Trespasser shows what Inquisition can be, without all that elf root-picking, shard-collecting bullshit. It can be an outrageously beautiful, compelling game. Every time BioWare experiments with structural format, which they have done with every Dragon Age title, a player can't help but wonder if this is still the same old Dragon Age they've loved for half a decade, the same old BioWare they remember from the Infinity Engine days. The complete game experience, with the new content, answers that with a resounding yes. The only frustrating part is that players had to wait a year and pay $45 extra to find that out. Thanks for watching.
I want to take a moment to thank by name the people who are currently donating $10 a month or more to me on Patreon. All of these videos are funded through the crowdfunding website, and it's through the generosity of everyone on this list and many others that I'm able to do these videos at all. People like Cameron Jackson, Cassie, Comfy Hat, Ron Gervais, Christian Zachariason, Pat Hay, Soeb Bashik, Balder Carlson, Dennis Clark, Maxwell Reed, Nick Cole Hamilton, Andrew Folt, Kevin DeBolt, Jake Brown, Ken Young, Dalton Seiler, Igor Babiuk, Niles D. McDonald, Seth Downing, Justin Hughes, Kumaran Vijayan, Nobody, Jared Meyer, Philip Martheron, Dylan Sibley, David Fry, David Reed, Josh, Boris Nielsen, Michael Atwell, Eugene Watson, Cameron, Alexander Leiston, David Gilbreth, Trolls Katzberg Sigvert, I Cannot Fly, Wesley M., Aaron Albeck, B. Tree, Alexander Heavens, Noah Dogars, Martin Karsten, Galak, Brett Gialmo, Martin Scanning, Finn Spencer, Andreas Larson, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Colin, Brad Carr, Ivan Martin, Josh Farkas, Chris Larkey, Aiden AK-47, Dan Reeder, Dewey, Annax of Rhodes, Niels Bachfrommer, Spyro Sedaris, Rob Clark, Matthew Lagden, Harley McAvoy, Jump Kick Punch, Carl Gleason, Tim Marsh, Joshua Beebe, Tizer Vicarian, Irvin, Brad Smith, Connor Biblo, Ryan Gunst, Preston Allen, Sigmund Copperwood, Stephen Lark, Amar Aguilar, Jeffrey Knudsen, Pontus Pfaffenstiel, D. Kimmo Heikkinen, Joe Wolf, Sangustin, Oliver Handliken, White Zero, Stephen Rubio, Yuri Petnas, Sill, Jonathan Fleichener, and many others who are currently donating below the $10 level. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.
A lot of people, myself included, weren't really too impressed with the way Inquisition ended. It felt like a halfway effort. It posed more questions than it answered, and Corypheus seemed like an unusually two-dimensional, low-effort villain for BioWare. Couple this with the MMO-influenced quest design, and we got a real problem with resolving plot threads in a way that feels as final and meaningful as in previous games. In the years since Inquisition came out, there's been 3 major $15 a pop DLC expansions. Jaws of Hakkon, the first, represents a straightforward continuation of Inquisition's level design priorities, a big outdoor area with many side quests and collectibles. The second, The Descent, is a Deep Roads dungeon crawl like the series hasn't actually seen since Origins and the Awakening expansion. The third and most impressive of the DLCs is Trespasser, the game's missing final act that not only brings Inquisition to the conclusion it was setting up from the get-go, but explains long-running mysteries about the setting's deep history and supernatural cosmology. Together, they add 25 hours to the game. But coming back to Inquisition post-climax is a little weird. All the conversations are tapped out and half-remembered. So, I began at the beginning and put in a second 80-hour playthrough to the game. It was worth it. The new content for Inquisition reshapes Inquisition's presentation as dramatically as DLC changed Mass Effect 3's total experience, with equally positive outcomes. I enjoyed my second playthrough with Inquisition much more than my first. I learned more, I had more fun, and, critically, I knew what to ignore. Jaws of Hakkon is a great place to start in talking about the DLC because it doesn't do anything differently from the formula of the main campaign's quest regions, but it does those things more sharply and cleanly than any previous region. It's a genuine side story, unmoored from the concerns of defeating Corypheus, but one that gives depth to enjoy a second playthrough of Inquisition because Inquisition has so much content that is frivolous and time-consuming. When I went through the game the first time, it took me 100 hours to finish most of the things in most of the regions. Shard collections, landmark collections, the works. It felt like a colossal waste of time, and I had no desire to do it again. This time, I only did quests, stories, and collectibles that interested me, and I cut the time almost in half. The main campaign took me only 55 hours this time, the new content about 25. I did not miss anything significant, and I mean that sincerely. Every plot element I wanted to pursue, I pursued. I skipped the equivalent of nearly 2 seasons of a television show worth of content that has no meaningful connection to the plot, and no reward besides tiny stat boosts and experience points. In Origins, most of the side quests
Hi, I'm Noah Gervais. In this video, I'm going to be going deep into the 3 DLCs for Dragon Age Inquisition: Jaws of Hakkon, The Descent, and Trespasser. It's going to be huge spoiler territory. There are other reviews that are just reviews. This is sort of going deep into the plot points and seeing what they might mean for Dragon Age 4 more than anything else. Heavy spoilers. But if you want to get deep into what's going on with the DLC, then that's what this video is for. Let's get to it.
Your Inquisitor's overall journey. You must follow in the footsteps of Ameridan, the first Inquisitor, who disappeared in the verdant Frostback Basin region some 800 years previous. History has forgotten Ameridan as a person. He's only really known for his significance in starting the Inquisition. As you progress through the DLC's main quest, you see that his journey parallels your own to some extent. He traveled with a diverse party of likable irregulars like you do. According to popular history, Ameridan disappeared hunting dragons for sport, selfishly abandoning his duty for vainglory. The truth, of course, is more complicated. But ultimately, the idea behind Jaws of Hakkon is to reflect on how your Inquisitor is likely to be remembered in the far future. Will the truth of how you arrived at your decisions, the depth of your friendships and rivalries, survive the passage of time? It's a question that's equally applicable to Inquisition as a piece of software, unfortunately. I didn't expect